Welcome to Stambaugeselian, where every story brings you into a world of thrilling mysteries. Enjoy your reading. While shopping, my daughter fell in love with an ordinary floral dress and begged me to buy it. But right after I paid, the smiling saleswoman's face suddenly darkened, and she muttered under her breath, "What a freak." I was furious. When I got home, I complained to my husband. He was initially angry enough to file a complaint, but after seeing the dress, his expression turned incredibly strange. "You really bought this?" "You did. We're getting divorced." Immediately, my mom heard the commotion and came to comfort me. But when she saw the dress on my daughter, she turned pale with shock, pointing at me and cursing, "How did I give birth to a monster like you?" At that moment, I was completely stunned. They were really that horrible? They suddenly turned on you because of a dress? On the other end of the phone, my best friend's voice sounded incredulous. I was both angry and aggrieved, tears streaming down uncontrollably. Yes, and I asked so many people. First, they all said there was nothing wrong with the dress. But once they heard I bought it for my daughter, they all acted weird. I don't know what is happening. I'm going crazy. Is there something wrong with me? Or is there something wrong with this world? Hearing me on the verge of a breakdown, my friend quickly said, "Send me a photo of the dress. Let me see what it looks like." Seeing my hesitation, she sighed, "Come on, we're best friends. Promise. Even if there is a problem, I'll tell you gently." Okay. But even with her reassurance, I was still scared. I only sent her the product link. Half a minute later, she called me back angry. "Is that bastard Kevin conspiring with others to mess with you?" I zoomed in on every detail of this dress. There is absolutely nothing wrong with it. It is just an ordinary floral dress. Hearing her words, I finally relaxed and complained. "Exactly. And I spent over $800 on this dress. It is not cheap." Their expressions made me feel like an evil stepmother. I was still complaining, not noticing that my friend's cursing had suddenly stopped. "You really bought this dress for your daughter?" Hearing that question, I instantly felt like I'd fallen into an ice pit as the saleswoman. My husband and my mom all had the same reaction after asking that question. Their attitudes toward me changed completely. I instinctively wanted to deny it, but my friend's voice suddenly turned cold. "I really wish I'd never met you. How can there be a monster like you? Who would do this to your own daughter?" With that, she hung up on me. When I tried calling back, she'd already blocked me. In an instant, the world spun around me and I collapsed to the floor. Why was this happening? When I numbly returned home from the coffee shop, I ran into my husband and mother packing their things. Seeing me, they looked cold and treated me like I was invisible. I took a deep breath and couldn't help grabbing my husband's and mother's hands, pleading desperately, "Honey, Mom, even if I did something wrong, please just tell me what it is. I really don't understand why everyone's attitude toward me changed. Because of a dress. Even you, the people closest to me in this world, are treating me this way. I am begging you, even if you are leaving, at least give me an answer before you go." "Okay." My husband ignored me coldly, shaking off my hand. He tried hard to suppress his anger, but after my repeated pestering, he grabbed my throat and slammed me against the wall, looking like he wanted to strangle me. And my mother, who used to love me most, just watched coldly, not saying a single word in my defense. Only when I was nearly suffocating did my husband suddenly release me, throwing me to the floor like garbage. The way he looked at me, like I was the most disgusting thing in the world. "Lily, do you really not understand, or are you just pretending? I think you are rotten to the core. After all, even the most evil people understand that tigers don't eat their cubs. You don't deserve to be human." My throat felt like it was about to break. But hearing the person I once loved most accuse me like this, I couldn't help defending myself. "Kevin, that is enough. It is just a floral dress. Fine. I'll never buy my daughter dresses again." "Okay. I really don't understand. Do you have someone else? Are you deliberately setting me up to make me have a mental breakdown?" I spoke without thinking, desperate and helpless. But my husband just sneered contemptuously. "Lily, even if I wanted to harm you, could I really mobilize the entire world to do it? You are the one with a filthy mind buying that dress for your daughter. And now you are trying to turn this around on me. Let me tell you, even if this goes to court, the judge will rule that you leave with nothing." Hearing his confident words, I froze for a moment. Then I turned to my mother with desperate hope, even hugging her legs and begging, "Mom, you are supposed to love me most in this world. Why are you treating me like this too? Even if you want to drive me to death, at least let me know why." My mom's face was still grim, but she did love me. So she wasn't as heartless as Kevin, sighed helplessly. But what she said chilled me to the bone. Lily, it is not that Mom wants to drive you to death. It is that you did something worse than an animal. How can I forgive you? You being alive is just a disaster for all humanity. If you end it now, it might be good for everyone. When you are dead, I'll burn offerings for you. But if you don't die, your daughter will eventually be driven to death by you. You choose. With that, she let go of my hand and walked out the door with my husband, both dragging their suitcases, their expressions cold. In the empty, desolate house, I collapsed on the floor, tortured by endless questions and on the verge of suffocation. If someone would just tell me the reason for all this, and then let me die, I would agree without hesitation. But now, if I couldn't investigate the truth, I would never die in peace. After pulling myself together, I went to the police station alone. On the way, I even found a stranger I didn't know to do another experiment. After seeing my daughter's floral dress, she had no reaction and even complimented it. But once she heard I bought this dress for my daughter, her expression changed immediately. She even pushed me toward the busy street, nearly getting me hit by a car. Even when caught by traffic police, she insisted she was just ridding society of a menace and had done nothing wrong. What made me break down was that, after the officer learned I bought the dress for my daughter, he actually let the woman who tried to harm me go, saying she did the right thing. He even looked like he wanted to push me himself, though. I nearly lost my life. I'd figured out the key to everything. It wasn't my daughter's floral dress itself. It was the fact that I bought my daughter a floral dress. I didn't understand why they had no reaction to the dress itself, yet hated me so much for buying it for my daughter. After all, the dress only cost a few $100s. Not cheap but not expensive either. With a head full of questions, I entered the police station. At least here I hoped I could be treated fairly and get the answer that had been troubling me for so long. After hearing my account, the two officers exchanged glances, their eyes showing confusion and disbelief. Younger officer even said gently, "Ma'am, what you are describing is so bizarre. It is like they've all been hypnotized. But rest assured, we can guarantee we're clear-headed right now with no abnormalities. Feel free to show us the photo of the dress. If they've all been hypnotized or controlled by some drug, this is extremely serious and we need to report it immediately." Hearing the officer's explanation, I felt much more at ease. But after showing them the photo, a strange look flashed in both their eyes. The young officer suddenly changed from his previous gentleness, frowning at me like I was a vile criminal. The older officer who'd been silent couldn't help saying, "Ma'am, are you sure you think there is nothing wrong with you? We now strongly suspect you of child abuse. Please take us to see your child." Hearing his stern order, a chill ran down my spine. But their expressions were too serious, orders too forceful. I had no choice but to take them home and let the female officer, who came with them, thoroughly examine my daughter. After confirming there were no injuries on my daughter, the seriousness on their faces didn't diminish. It only intensified. The young officer said sternly, "Don't think that just because we didn't find evidence this time, you are off the hook, Miss Lily. From today on, you'll be under our close surveillance. If your daughter Emma shows any abnormalities or injuries, you'll be the prime suspect." They were about to leave, but I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed them, breaking down. "Can you please tell me why everyone is like this? I didn't do anything. I just bought my daughter a dress. Why does everyone think I'd abuse my own flesh and blood? You can even arrest me and throw me in jail, as long as you tell me the answer." "Okay." Seeing me at my breaking point, the two officers exchanged glances. The younger one said nothing, but the older officer sighed. Though his tone was still stern and even disgusted, he pointed me in a direction. "Ma'am, I suggest you see a psychiatrist. As for the answer, perhaps after you receive treatment, you'll understand it yourself." With that, they left. Despite my attempts to stop them, I sat collapsed on the floor, numbly holding my confused daughter, tears of helplessness streaming from my eyes. For a moment, I even wondered if I had a mental illness, if I'd really done something terrible to my daughter, without realizing it, something that meant I deserved to die. But after calming down, I wiped away my tears. After putting my daughter to sleep, I took a deep breath and went alone to the nearest hospital. The night air was bitterly cold as I stepped through the sliding glass doors of the city hospital. The sterile smell of bleach and rubbing alcohol immediately assaulted my senses. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead with a sickly, relentless buzzing sound. I walked toward the psychiatric wing like a ghost wandering through a graveyard. My mind was a chaotic storm of fragmented thoughts and suffocating despair. I had made sure the doors of my house were locked and the security system was armed before leaving Emma asleep in her bed. I needed answers tonight, or I knew I would not survive until the morning. The receptionist behind the glass partition barely looked up from her computer screen as I approached. Her face was illuminated by the pale blue light of the monitor. I told her I was experiencing a severe psychological crisis and needed to speak with the doctor immediately. She handed me a clipboard filled with intrusive questions and pointed toward a row of empty plastic chairs. I sat down, my hands trembling so violently that the pen kept slipping from my fingers. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the disgusted face of my husband. I heard the cruel, heartless words of my own mother echoing in the dark corners of my mind. I felt the rough hands of the police officer pushing me away like I was a diseased animal. What was wrong with me? What was wrong with this world? After what felt like an eternity, a tall man in a dark gray suit and a white coat called my name. He introduced himself as Dr. Eris Thorne. His voice was calm, professional, and entirely devoid of warmth. I followed him down a long, windowless corridor that seemed to stretch on forever. We entered a small, dimly lit office lined with heavy wooden bookshelves and leather furniture. He gestured for me to sit in the armchair across from his massive mahogany desk. I sank into the leather, feeling completely small and utterly defenseless. Dr. Thorne sat down, folded his hands, and looked at me with piercing blue eyes. He asked me to tell him exactly what had brought me to the emergency psychiatric ward in the middle of the night. I took a deep, ragged breath and began to speak. I told him everything from the very beginning. I described the shopping trip with my beautiful daughter Emma. I described the way her eyes lit up when she saw that simple, ordinary floral dress on the mannequin. I recounted the sudden, terrifying shift in the saleswoman's demeanor. I explained how my husband had violently attacked me. I told him how my mother had practically begged me to kill myself. I cried as I remembered my best friend blocking my number and wishing I was dead. I detailed the horrific encounter with the stranger on the street and the chilling reaction of the police officers. Through it all, Dr. Thorne listened in absolute, unnatural silence. His face was a blank mask, completely unreadable. He did not interrupt me once, nor did he offer any words of comfort. When I finally finished my harrowing tale, I was gasping for air, tears streaming down my cheeks. I looked at him with desperate, pleading eyes, begging him to tell me I was just suffering from a delusion. I wanted him to diagnose me with a brain tumor or a psychotic break. Any medical explanation would be better than the terrifying reality that the entire world had turned against me. Dr. Thorne slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notepad. He did not look at me as he began to write. After a long, agonizing minute, he finally spoke. His voice was barely a whisper, yet it felt heavier than lead. He asked to see the photograph of the dress. My hand shook as I unlocked my phone and pulled up the product link I had sent to my former best friend. I turned the screen toward him and pushed the phone across the polished surface of the desk. Dr. Thorne leaned forward and adjusted his glasses. He stared at the bright, cheerful floral pattern on the screen. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then the color completely drained from his face. His eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror. He pushed his chair back so fast that it scraped loudly against the wooden floor. He looked at me not as a patient but as a monster. He stood up, walked quickly to the office door, and locked it with a loud, definitive click. He then moved to the windows and tightly shut the blinds. Panic surged through my veins like ice water. I jumped up from the chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. I asked him what he was doing and why he was looking at me like that. Dr. Thorne slowly walked back to his desk, keeping a safe distance from me as if I were contagious. He asked me in a trembling voice if I was playing some kind of sick, twisted joke on him. I sobbed uncontrollably, shaking my head and swearing on my daughter's life that I was entirely clueless. I dropped to my knees right there in the psychiatric office, begging him to explain. He stared down at my weeping, pathetic form for a long time. Finally, he sighed, running a trembling hand through his graying hair. He told me to sit back down, warning me that what he was about to say would shatter my reality. I crawled back into the chair, clutching my arms around myself as if trying to hold my soul together. Dr. Thorne opened a locked drawer in his desk and pulled out a heavy, leather-bound historical archive book. He slammed it down on the desk and opened it to a marked page. He turned the book toward me. On the page was a black and white photograph of a massive, heavily guarded facility surrounded by barbed wire. In front of the facility stood a long line of weeping mothers. Next to each mother was a little girl wearing a dress identical in pattern to the one I had purchased today. I stared at the photograph, my mind struggling to comprehend the nightmare unfolding before me. Dr. Thorne began to speak, his voice laced with decades of societal trauma. He explained that 40 years ago, the world suffered a catastrophic economic and agricultural collapse. Millions were starving, and the government enacted a horrific, desperate measure known as the Blossom Directive. It was a voluntary population control initiative designed to eliminate the most vulnerable members of society. Families who could no longer afford to feed their children were given a dark, sinister option. They could surrender their daughters to the state biofarms, where the children would be subjected to endless labor and medical testing until they died. In exchange, the family's debts would be entirely wiped clean. Dr. Thorne's voice cracked as he explained the most horrifying detail of all. To formalize the surrender, the mother was required to purchase a specific garment from a designated state registry. That garment was the floral dress. The purchase price of $800 served as the legally binding processing fee. Putting that dress on a child was the ultimate symbol of maternal betrayal. It meant the mother was officially condemning her own flesh and blood to a slow, agonizing death. The directive had officially ended 20 years ago, when the economy recovered. However, the deep, collective trauma left behind had permanently scarred the human psyche. The floral dress remained a globally recognized symbol of pure, unadulterated evil. Although the state biofarms were publicly supposed to be closed, a dark underground network still operated legally through a loophole for parents who wished to discard their children. By purchasing that exact dress today, I had legally submitted Emma to the harvesters. I had told the entire world that I hated my daughter enough to sell her life for personal freedom. The room started to spin violently around me. The walls seemed to close in, crushing the breath out of my lungs. I told him I bought it at a regular boutique in the mall. Dr. Thorne shook his head grimly, explaining that the state registry hides in plain sight in wealthy shopping districts. They rely on the dark desires of broken parents who actively seek them out. He asked me how I could possibly have lived in this society and not known about the greatest tragedy in human history. I screamed that I had never heard of the Blossom Directive in my entire life. I told him my memories of history were entirely different, filled with normal events and normal dresses. Dr. Thorne stared at me, his clinical mind racing to make sense of my genuine ignorance. He hypothesized that my brain had suffered a massive dissociative amnesia to protect me from some unknown trauma, effectively erasing the horrors of the world. Or, he whispered, I was suffering from a rare psychological phenomenon where I genuinely believed I belonged to a different kinder reality. But regardless of my mental state, the horrifying truth of the situation remained unchanged. The purchase had been completed. The processing fee had been accepted. The legal contract was sealed. Dr. Thorne looked at the clock on the wall, his face turning an ashen shade of pale. It was currently 11:15 at night. He told me that according to the unchangeable laws of the registry, the harvesters always collected the surrendered children precisely at midnight. My heart stopped beating. The blood in my veins turned to solid ice. I had exactly 45 minutes before anonymous government agents arrived at my house to take my baby girl away forever. That was why my husband and mother had packed their bags and fled in disgust. They believed I had secretly planned this horrific act, and they wanted no part in the social ruin it would bring. They didn't even try to save Emma because under the law, once the mother signs the contract, interference is a treasonous offense punishable by immediate execution. I let out a primal guttural scream of absolute agony. I leaped from the chair, knocking it backward onto the floor. I grabbed Dr. Thorne by the collar of his white coat, shaking him violently. I demanded to know how to cancel the contract and save my daughter. He gently but firmly removed my hands from his coat, his eyes filled with a deep, tragic pity. He told me there was no cancellation policy in the Blossom Directive. The moment the receipt printed, Emma's fate was permanently sealed. But as I turned to run out the door, fueled by blind maternal rage, he called out to me. He said there was one archaic, long-forgotten loophole buried deep within the original legal text of the directive. I froze with my hand on the brass doorknob, turning back to look at him with desperate hope. Dr. Thorne explained that the harvesters are essentially mindless bureaucrats bound by strict contractual rituals. The contract requires the child to be wearing the intact floral dress at the exact moment of midnight. If the mother destroys the surrender garment with her own blood before the clock strikes 12, the offering is considered physically corrupted. The contract would be instantly voided by the mother's blood sacrifice, rendering the harvesters powerless. I didn't wait to hear another word. I threw open the office door and sprinted down the long, sterile hospital corridor. I pushed past orderlies and patients, ignoring their startled shouts. I burst through the sliding glass doors into the freezing night air. I ran to my car, my hands fumbling uncontrollably with the keys. I jammed the key into the ignition, the engine roaring to life. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, tearing out of the parking lot and onto the empty city streets. The dashboard clock glowed with a terrifying red light. It was 11:25. I had 35 minutes to reach my house, find the dress, and perform the gruesome loophole. Rain began to fall, slicking the dark roads and obscuring my vision. I drove like a madwoman, running red lights and swerving around the few cars left on the road. My mind was a terrifying whirlwind of panic and determination. I cursed my husband for his cowardice. I cursed my mother for her lack of faith in me. Most of all, I cursed myself for bringing this nightmare into my innocent daughter's life. I finally swerved into my suburban neighborhood, the tires screeching loudly against the wet asphalt. I slammed the brakes in front of my house at exactly 11:45. But my heart plummeted into my stomach when I saw what was waiting for me. Parked in my driveway was my husband's car. Standing on the front porch, illuminated by the harsh yellow porch light, were Kevin and my mother. But they were not alone. Parked silently on the street in front of my house was a massive windowless black van. Standing at the base of my front steps were two incredibly tall men wearing matching gray raincoats. Their faces were hidden beneath the wide brims of dark hats. The harvesters had arrived early. I threw the car door open and sprinted across the wet lawn, screaming Emma's name. Kevin stepped forward, blocking my path to the front door with a look of absolute disgust. He yelled at me to stay away, calling me a murderer and a psychopath. He said the harvesters were inside waiting for midnight, and he and my mother had only returned to ensure the transaction went smoothly so they wouldn't be implicated. I could not believe the words coming out of the mouth of the man I had loved for 10 years. He was willingly standing by while monsters prepared to take his child. I screamed at him that I didn't know about the law, and that I was trying to save her. My mother stepped forward, her face twisted in a sneer of pure contempt. She told me to stop lying and accept the horrific choice I had made. I realized then that they were entirely broken by the fear of this society. They loved the rules and their own safety more than they loved Emma. I didn't waste another second arguing with cowards. I lunged forward, clawing my way past Kevin with a ferocious animalistic strength I didn't know I possessed. I scratched his face and shoved my mother aside, throwing the front door open. I sprinted up the stairs, my heart pounding so hard I thought my chest would explode. I burst into Emma's bedroom. The room was completely dark, save for the pale moonlight filtering through the window. Emma was sitting on the edge of her bed, rubbing her sleepy eyes. Standing in the corner of the room was a third harvester, perfectly still, holding a silver pocket watch. Laying on the chair next to the bed was the floral dress. The harvester turned his cold, empty eyes toward me. He spoke in a voice that sounded like grinding metal, announcing that the time of collection was imminent. I ignored him and rushed to the chair, grabbing the cursed floral dress in my trembling hands. The fabric felt heavy and utterly evil against my skin. I heard heavy footsteps rushing up the stairs behind me. Kevin and my mother appeared in the doorway, shouting at me to put the dress down and accept the consequences. I looked at the clock on Emma's nightstand. It read 11:58. I had less than 2 minutes. I turned to the harvester, holding the dress tightly against my chest. I declared loudly that I was nullifying the contract through maternal corruption. The harvester stepped forward, his massive hand reaching out to stop me. Kevin screamed that I was going to get them all killed for interfering. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the sharp set of keys to my car. Without a second thought, I raised my right hand and slashed the jagged metal edge of the key deeply across my left palm. A blinding pain shot up my arm, but I welcomed it. Warm dark crimson blood immediately began to pour from the deep wound. I grabbed the floral dress and smeared my bleeding hand violently across the bright, cheerful fabric. I ripped the delicate silk with my keys, tearing the garment into unrecognizable shreds. I stained every single flower with my own blood, completely destroying the symbol of surrender. The clock on the nightstand clicked to midnight with a loud digital beep. The harvester stopped dead in his tracks. He stared down at the ruined, blood-soaked pile of fabric on the floor. A heavy, terrifying silence fell over the bedroom. Emma whimpered, hiding under her blankets, terrified by the screaming and the blood. The harvester slowly reached into his gray raincoat and pulled out a heavy black ledger. He flipped to a page, drew a thick red line through a name and snapped the book shut. He looked at me with a completely blank expression. He stated mathematically that the offering was corrupted, the contract was voided, and the penalty fee would be extracted from the state. Without another word, he turned around and walked past my stunned husband and mother. I heard the heavy footsteps of the 3 harvesters leaving my house. I heard the engine of the black van roar to life and fade away into the rainy night. I collapsed onto the floor, clutching my bleeding hand to my chest, gasping for air. The oppressive, suffocating terror slowly began to lift from the room. Kevin and my mother stood in the doorway, staring at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. They slowly realized what I had just done. I had violently bled for my daughter and fought the harvesters, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that I had never intended to surrender her. Kevin took a hesitant step forward, tears welling up in his eyes. He reached out his hand, his voice shaking as he whispered my name and tried to apologize. My mother covered her mouth, sobbing loudly as she realized she had condemned her innocent daughter to death over a misunderstanding. But as I looked up at them from the floor, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, hard emptiness. They had shown me their true colors in the darkest hour of my life. They had been willing to let my daughter be dragged into a nightmare simply to protect their own social standing. They were not my family anymore. They were strangers infected by a sick, cowardly world. I slowly stood up, wrapping a piece of the clean, unbloodied fabric around my wounded hand. I walked over to Emma's bed and gently scooped my crying daughter into my arms. I held her tightly against my chest, kissing her forehead and whispering that Mommy would never let anything bad happen to her. Kevin pleaded with me, begging me to let him help me bandage my hand and explaining that the law had terrified him into submission. I looked him dead in the eye, my voice as cold as the freezing rain outside. I told him that tigers do not eat their cubs, and real parents do not hand their children to monsters. I walked straight past him and my weeping mother, carrying my entire world in my arms. I walked out the front door, leaving the house, the betrayal, and the madness behind me forever. I got into my car, buckled Emma safely into the backseat, and started the engine. As I drove away into the dark, rainy night, I didn't know where I was going to go. Perhaps I would find Dr. Thorne's safe zone, or perhaps I would just drive until I found a corner of the world that still understood the meaning of love. All I knew was that I was alive, my daughter was safe, and I would burn the entire world to the ground before I let anyone take her from me again. Wow, what a mind-bending journey. This story really makes you question the nature of reality, and how society can instantly turn against you based on dark, unwritten rules. The betrayal Lily faced from her own family is truly heartbreaking, but her fierce maternal instinct to save Emma at all costs is incredibly inspiring. Do you think Lily made the right choice by leaving her husband and mother behind in the end? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more thrilling tales.